Hello and welcome to our next speaker series for Mental Health Awareness Month. We have the privilege of hearing from Ali Schreier on the convenience of loneliness. So I am going to turn it over to her and begin.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. And I hope that this is helpful to all of you and something that you will get a lot out of. To start, I just wanted to say a little bit about myself, but we are going to be talking tonight about the convenience of loneliness. I'm going to ask that you mute yourself. If you want to be on camera, totally up to you. If you want to be off camera, I do not care either way. So whatever works for you all. So we are going to go ahead and jump in here. So a brief introduction about myself. If you don't know who I am, like I said, I'm Ali Schreier, and I am the psychotherapist and founder of Schreier Counseling and Consulting. And it's a private practice here in Denver, in the Metro Denver area. And we serve children, teens, families, the whole gamut of things, including early intervention, as well as testing for cognitive testing. And so we just do a whole host of things. And then just a little bit more about my background. I'm a mental health advocate. I'm a national speaker at many events. I work with different organizations and corporations, both nationally and internationally, on implementing mental health practices and well-being practices into businesses to support families and individuals. And then previously, I worked at Children's Hospital, as well as the University of Denver as an adjunct. So I've been around Denver for a while. I cannot claim that I'm a Denverite because I wasn't born here, but I have been here for quite some time, about 20 years now, and just really love this place and love organizations just like Gold Crown. So I'm happy to be here tonight to talk with all of you. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start by kind of framing it up with a roadmap of what we're talking about, why we're here, and kind of the direction we're going. What we're talking about is really the loneliness, and really that the Surgeon General has just come out with saying, like, kind of the maybe the fallout or a connection to the pandemic is that there's now an epidemic of loneliness that we're facing, and why loneliness is really the new pandemic that we're seeing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, especially when it relates to, of course, kids and teens, but also really thinking about how it relates to you as well. The effect, right? How does that impact all of us? How does that impact our kiddos? And then our action, what can we do about it? That's usually where people ask me the most questions. We will have Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to ask that you hold your questions until the end, and I would be happy to answer those. But that is where we will spend the bulk of our time is. So we know that this is happening. We're going to hear a little bit about why and what's going on with all of this. And then really, what can we do about it to help support our families and those that we love around us? So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first thing is really thinking about the impact of COVID. When we think about COVID, right, and which is sometimes gives us all the shudders, we think about that we were told and we were kind of informed that we should really be isolating and that we should be separating, that we should be doing things to ensure the safety of ourselves and others. And that included pulling away from all of our kind of emotional and social connectors in a physical way. And what happened from there is that the fallout from that has led to a place now where people really do things more out of convenience, which is leading to loneliness. A lot of things were created to make our worlds more convenient during this pandemic, during COVID, including ordering groceries, for example, or Amazon going gangbusters, right? Everything comes to our door, having remote learning or hybrid workplaces, all of those different factors have now created a lot of convenience for us so that we are able to do a lot more from home or from someplace other than where that usually originated, including kids are now even practicing sports virtually. So all of those things to say that the impact of COVID actually kind of snowballed what had already started. And the research will actually talk about that. The technology, since that came even pre-COVID, the technology was really kind of the starting off point for a lot of this loneliness. COVID happened, and now here we're kind of seeing where we're at and this new epidemic of what we're facing. So I don't know if anyone saw this, but the Surgeon General's advisory on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation came out just recently, just in the last month or so. And these are some of the things that I thought were most impactful that I took away from it. One being that we are lacking social connection, that it's as dangerous as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Now that is pretty impactful when we really think about what it's doing to our physical health, to our mental health as well, but really even our physical health that we are seeing. We can actually monitor and observe that loneliness does take a toll on our bodies as well as on our mental health. We get sick more often. Our ability to fight infections goes down. We don't focus as well. Our cognitive decline is faster. There's lots of factors that contribute when we're lonely because we were created to be social creatures. And the advisory really raises alarm about the devastating impact that this is having. And I like the quote here at the bottom: over 4 decades of research has produced robust evidence that lacking social connection, in particular social isolation, is associated with a significantly increased risk for early death from all causes. So if that does not frame up this talk and why this is so necessary to talk about, of how we get ahead of this, I'm not sure what does. So let's keep looking. So this, I think, is really fascinating. So if you're kind of skeptical or you're wondering about this and you're saying, I don't really understand, what actually is loneliness, we'll get to that as well. But these are the trends that we're seeing with loneliness in connection to mental health disorders. Okay. So if you look at the graph on the left, the depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders, what we're looking at from 2022 is really that those continue to increase for all of these ages, as you can see. Okay. And what's happening is that while mental health concerns are going like this, social connection is starting to go like this. And so we're seeing that those actually do correlate. There is some sort of causation, but there is certainly a correlation because we don't know all the causation behind it yet. But I think that's really important when we think about this, that we continue to talk about like the mental health crises. I know Children's Hospital Colorado has talked a lot about that. What do we do? We're in a crisis for mental health for youth. Yes. And some of the things that we're seeing then is how can we then connect that with this piece of loneliness? What should we be doing? I know the graph on the right is a little bit hard to see. It's a little bit cumbersome, but it actually comes from the Surgeon General. And it's looking at different factors, as you can see: social isolation, social engagement with friends, and really starting to just highlight that those continue to go down from 2003 to 2020. What we're seeing is that decrease. So this is a question that I hear a lot. So what actually is the difference between loneliness and being alone? The difference is that you can actually be alone without feeling lonely. Loneliness is really a sense of isolation or emptiness. It's a lack of meaningful social connection and feeling disconnected. And it's detached from others, even when you're surrounded by people. And then alone is actually a state of being by oneself, right? You're without other people, and it can be chosen as temporary condition where an individual enjoys solitude or prefers to just spend time alone. So sometimes when I'm describing this, especially to teens, and people will ask them like, oh, do you feel lonely? Right? And they're like, yes. And you're like, well, do you feel lonely, or do you just mean like you're alone a lot, right? Maybe you're just not a kid that's in a lot of sports after school or a lot of activities. That's really different. Or you're in the off season, for example. Right? So when I'm asking kids and teens, and when you are asking your families and your kids and teens, I would really encourage you to even kind of outline a little bit of the difference and ask them, sometimes you can feel lonely even when you're with people. And sometimes we can be alone and be really happy about that. Like when you're hanging out in your room, or you're drawing by yourself, or you're reading a book, maybe you're alone, but that feels really good, right? How are you feeling? Do you feel alone, or do you feel lonely? And really getting a better sense of what they mean, because those two can be confusing. So this question comes up all the time. People want to ask and know about how social media contributes to loneliness. And what I will say is absolutely yes, we do have the data and the research that says social media does contribute to loneliness. to what degree is really individualized. It depends on so many different variables, including how much time somebody's on tech. Do they have other social supports? Are there other areas of connection that ward off some of that loneliness feeling? But I thought that it was such an important piece to at least highlight, because social media does contribute, like I said, but we also know that it is growing in the intensity for our children and for our teens, in that people are using it more frequently, they're using it longer, the duration is longer, and the intensity in which they use technology, meaning how they interact with technology, is also increasing. They're no longer just using it to Google something. Right now we have ChatGPT, we have all these other ways that we are interacting with technology. And so I'm just going to highlight a few things here, that Americans spend an average of 6 hours a day on digital media. The rate of loneliness among young adults has increased every year since 1976 to 2019. And the only reason it says 2019 is because that's when the data was collected. So it actually has continued since then. The percentage of 13 to 17-year-olds who say they're online almost constantly has doubled since 2015, and so on and so forth. And so if you are looking for, trying to find the balance of social media with your own family and with your kids, I would encourage you to start thinking about it in terms of loneliness of, is this used as a tool, or is this something that is maybe kind of taking them out of the interactions of social interactions or family interactions, and that is contributing to maybe something else that's going on, or maybe possibly even negative feelings. Okay, so here is what people always want to know. So what do we do about this, right? And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time tonight, is what do we do about all these loneliness factors? What do we do about these things as families? How can you arm yourself as well as your kids? So if you are wanting to leave here with tips and tricks, this is where you might want to be either taking notes, and I'm sure we can share this out as well. But this would probably be the most impactful for the takeaways for you and your families. Okay. So the first is the rule of three. Okay. The rule of three. So I like this graphic. Again, it's from the Surgeon General. But the rule of three is that if you have 3 different pockets of social connection, that is statistically and from the research what will help you ward off loneliness. So if I am an individual, I would be looking at 3 different kind of outlets for who I am. I might be looking at my neighborhood. I might be looking at my church. I might be looking at my family of origin. Maybe I should be connecting with my soccer team or my basketball team, right? So I'm looking for 3 different ways to connect and interact in society. It doesn't have to be just 3 people. It can be just 3 people. The tricky part is you want those 3 people to be spread between different parts of your life. And the reason is because, as maybe you experience, if you put on your junior high hat here, when one of those areas changes, disappears, morphs, moves away even, then we feel lonely. We lose that one. And the hope is that if you have 3, and the research supports, if you have 3 different types of outlets for social connection, that if one disappears, you're still okay, right? It's replaceable. If 2 disappear at the same time, we usually do see that that's when people start to struggle a little bit more mentally. We start to kind of take inventory of, maybe it's me, right? Why don't people want to be around me? We start to feel lonely. I don't have any friends. Nobody includes me in anything. We start to think negative thoughts about ourselves, right? So that's why spreading those out between different areas in your life or different kind of systems that you're a part of is really helpful and effective. And again, that's for you as well as for your kids and your adolescents. What we look for is this should start around school age, so around 5 years old. Prior to 5, the family, your kind of nuclear family, is the most important for your social connections. And so you're not looking for those other outlets in the same way that you do once you start school, and then starting to have your own autonomy becomes really important in your own sense of identity. So I like this graphic from the Surgeon General because it looks at like, where are some of these places and like, what can you do? So it's saying like for an individual, you could look at, thinking about your gender, for example, or different life stages. Maybe that's different periods that you can connect with people or where those social connections do take shape. Your community, maybe it's schools or a workplace or a local business. If you frequent the same coffee shop, that might be a nice social connection for you. So just thinking about it from different pieces of how you live your life. Okay, the second tip is called special time. So this comes from, it's called parent behavior training. And so it's a therapeutic modality and strategy, and evidence-based practice for how you connect back with your kids and your family. And it's really aimed at working with kids that are, again, 5 to about 18. 18 is certainly on the high end. Some of the research actually only goes up to about 15. But what you're looking for is that, just like this picture so beautifully shows, is that you're looking for this special connection time. How that wards off loneliness. If you think of yourself as one of those 3, right? Or your family as one of those kind of 3 buckets that they are pulling from for those connections and for that attachment, that yours as a family member is one of the strongest connections that you can have and one of the strongest sources of attachment. So that special time, what it is, it's literally special because you call it special. It doesn't matter what the activity is, that totally is not necessary to make it very exciting. But what you're looking for is that it's uninterrupted time and that it's just between you and the individual person, that you are doing something with shared enjoyment. So what that looks like then is that you are reading a book, playing a board game, tickling each other, snuggling on the couch, going for a walk. Eye contact is a really important piece of special time as well. So if you're actually looking at that person, that adds to that shared enjoyment and that shared experience. We're looking for about 20 minutes. So if you're thinking like, holy moly, Allie, there is no way that I have time to fit in special time with my kids, or I have 4 kids, how is that humanly possible? It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be all 4 in the same day, right? You can spread it out. But ideally, you are having special time with each child in your family 2 times a week. So for me, I'll give a personal example. I have 2 kids at home. And so for my special time, usually we do reading. That's often a good go-to in our house, or we do like some sort of family game night. And the family game night, what I try to do is structure it with 1 kid that we play a game and then we rotate between my spouse and I. And so that we kind of are tag teaming special time. It's almost a 2-for-1, if you will. So think about what works for you. So this special time, what we know comes from that is that we're building not only social connection and warding off loneliness, but we're also building a better attachment to our family and that we feel intrinsically valued for who we are. That's one of the biggest benefits from this time. For teens, it's really hard because technology tends to be the go-to of like, let's watch a movie, or even a little bit older kids, right? Let's watch a movie or let's watch a show together. We're missing that eye contact. So ideally, it would be something maybe without technology or without a screen, or if it is, that it's interactive, so you can be talking about it as you do it. Okay, tip 3, model healthy social connections. So this is way more important. We are learning every year than we ever thought it was, is that our kids look to us to model how we should be living our lives. They're constantly evaluating how we interact with our spouses, how we talk to our friends and our family, what we say about their teachers behind their backs, right? Like all those things, what we say about coaches. All of those things are really important when we're trying to teach this social connection and how to ward off loneliness. And so one of the best things you can do is really model this for them. And it is so hard to do, but if you start to think about it, especially if you have young kids at home, this can be really hard because you just can't find the time. What I would say is think about how you can invest for yourself in some of your people and your own social connections, and think about it from your child's eyes of what they're watching. What are they observing? It's like they get to watch a TV show of you in your life, and they are learning from that about those social connections and how you also protect yourself from feeling loneliness all the time, right? So I know one mom that she does coffee hour at her house all the time. She's always inviting other parents over, big kids, small kids, doesn't even matter who they are. They come over, they stop by for a cup of coffee on Saturdays. And that's like kind of the open door policy for them. Those kids are all watching. And I love this picture of these two women here. Those kids are watching that connection between these two people, right? And so if you're thinking about how to do this for yourself, it's even in those small interactions of making the choice at the grocery store, for example, to say the checkout person's name, right? That you are not on your phone. You are not only distracted with your own children, if they're small, especially, right? Or the teens, that you say like, hi, Betty, good to see you again today. Beautiful necklace. Or isn't it a lovely day outside? Any of those things you are modeling for your kids of how to successfully do this. Okay, number 4, I have coined the dumping hour. I call it the dumping hour. It does not have to be an hour long, but what this does is essentially it's a time that you have set up with your kids or your family or your spouse or whoever you want to do this with, that you set up somewhere between 10 minutes and 60 minutes of where they get to dump. They just get to let it all out. Your whole job is just to listen. You are not problem solving. You are empathizing and trying to understand. And it's so hard to do that when we have our kids, especially if they're making silly mistakes or they're doing something goofy or their friends are doing something goofy and they're telling you all about it. And you would love to give them advice and tell them what to do to kind of protect them from whatever's happening. I would strongly encourage you not to during the dumping hour. During that time, it is really meant for you. Again, it's almost that same feeling as special time in terms of your connection and attachment. But your job is to really just listen and be there for them. And so you can say like, do you need some dumping time? Is it dumping hour? Right? Whatever it may be. You can do this with kids as young as 5 and as old as, 95. But thinking about what they need to just be heard and listened to, that, as you can imagine, feels like then they are seen. When somebody feels seen, that absolutely wards off loneliness because you feel like you're understood. If you feel misunderstood or you feel like you are just constantly told how you can solve the problem, right? You don't feel like people get you. And I hear this a lot from teens, is that the dumping hour is really effective in helping them feel less lonely because they have a lot of things going on and a lot of stress going on in their world. When you think about being a teen today, holy moly. And so having an opportunity that they just share with you and get it all out, and you're not judging them and you are not saying, well, you probably just shouldn't hang out with Jake anymore, right? Those things really shut it down. And then they start to feel more isolated and they start to actually physically isolate from you. And then that connection starts to disappear, again, leading to loneliness. So find that dumping hour time. You can name it that. And again, it doesn't have to be an hour. Okay, tip 5 is making space for gratefulness. So I love this one. I actually really like doing this one with young kids. Most people don't start doing a gratefulness practice until their kids are a little bit older. And that's just kind of anecdotally from working with families for a long time. People will say, well, do my kids know what being grateful is, right? Like, are they just thankful? Is that kind of the same thing? Kind of, you can start that way. If that's like how you want to start as a family, you can do this as a family. You can do it individually with your kids. You can do it a whole bunch of ways. You can also just do this for yourself. But making space for gratefulness, again, helps you really connect back with the good pieces of your life. And usually what you will find is that there are people involved in what you're grateful for. Sometimes it's nature. Sometimes it's that you aced a test. Sometimes it's that you worked really hard at your basketball game, right? It can be other things, but there is usually an element of social connection involved with gratefulness. And even if it's not 100% of the time, it's enough of the time that it is a way to reflect on that those social connections are important, which then is positively reinforcing that you want to do it again. So you're like creating your own little positive loop about being socially connected, if you picture it that way. For families, what I would encourage is you can do this around the table, right? You can do it at breakfast, you can do it at lunch, you can do it at ice cream, you can do it whatever you want. You can do it at bedtime, but that parents also participate. So if there are caregivers or even like a babysitter that you use pretty often, even the babysitter can participate. You're talking about how we are grateful for things in our lives, which then gives us that positive loop back. Okay. Tip 6 is minimize distractions during conversations. So I love the picture of the woman doing like 700 things. I just think that's a really funny image of thinking about that we are all really busy and technology is added to the busyness. It's also added to the convenience, but it's added to the busyness of how many things we're trying to do. The challenge is that then we are distracted when we are having our conversations. We're distracted during those social connection times. And so is it convenient to be emailing or texting someone while you're also listening to your kid? Absolutely. Is it convenient to sit on the couch with your spouse at the end of the night and go back to work as they are also on their computer going back to work? Yes, 100%, super convenient. Also, a little bit isolating, right? You are more involved with your computer and with the conversation or the work or whatever it is that you're doing that's in front of you than you are with the person that's physically sitting next to you. And that challenge is really difficult because one, it becomes habit forming. Our technology is really habit forming. And so it's very hard to then break that habit. The second thing that is really difficult about it is that we are unintentionally, not always, but unintentionally sometimes sending the message that whoever it is that's physically next to you is not as important. I've actually heard families that I've worked with that have come to my practice say, I think my teen would respond faster as they're sitting next to me if I would just text them. And that for me is where we start to see the breakdown of convenience with loneliness. That is a really big challenge of how do we address this from a family, from a society, as coaches, as mentors, right? As just humans. How do we address this so that we are making sure that we are not distracted from our actual conversations that are being physically present and get all of our things done? And so what I would say is create some boundaries during your distractions, right? During those distracted times. The picture of the kiddo here pulling on the parent. One of the things that I say to parents often is, if you have work to do when your kid comes home from school or is coming home from practice or whatever it may be, and you've got like a short period of like, I don't know, 15 to 30 to 45 minutes of like kid time, right? That's when I would leave your phone in the other room. I would try to be totally present on where you're at with your kiddo. One, that's good modeling. And two, talk to your kid about doing the same, right? You walk in the door from practice. I haven't seen you all day. I know that you want to catch up with your friends on your texting. I know that you want to, go do this, that, and the other thing, right? Or you have a ton of homework to do. You have a big project tomorrow. Totally get it. So we're not going to get this whole 45 minutes together, but we're at least going to get like 10 minutes of actual connection, right? Is it as convenient as multitasking? No. Is it more effective? Yes. And actually, what's fascinating is that the people that are able to do that and compartmentalize even small moments of time, like about 10 minutes of time of that social connection, we are finding that they are more productive when they are working. So social connection can actually help you be more productive as well. So if you need to use that for your teens as they are trying to put their phones down, or you're encouraging them to as they're multitasking, that might be a nice in if that is motivating for them. Okay, so this leads me to tip 7. This is the tech timeouts. So these are periods of time with the family without tech. It's a positive payout with that eye contact again, like I was talking about earlier with that special time. And it's implementing boundaries into the nonstop action of technology, giving your brain periods of rest. So what we know is that having tech timeouts in those periods of rest are really significant times for regenerating neurons and neural pathways in your brain. It helps you think more clearly. It helps with that like cognition piece and recall with memory. And so we actually do need screen breaks. So tech timeouts are a nice way, even though they're not as convenient, right? As I was just saying with the last slide, they're not as convenient to put down that tech. but they're really helpful in terms of your brain development, as well as warding off that loneliness. So if you are wondering how to do this, or you don't think your teens or kids are up for this, right? That's, again, it goes back to that modeling of like, if you all do it together though. I had one family that the dad was, I don't know what his job was, but some big job, and he always had to be on call. And so he was constantly working and said, like, I legitimately cannot put down my tech. And so we talked about what would happen if you put down your tech, right? What would happen if you put your phone down? Would someone die, right? Is it that serious? If it is not that serious, would, something else really, really terrible happen? If it is not that serious and it's like that client's going to be mad at me, right? Or that's not managing the expectations of my team or whatever it may be. My answer is then the exact same of you should still be having tech timeouts. How long they are is totally up to you and your family, whatever works for your family. 5 minutes, 5 hours, 2 hours, all day Saturdays, only on Tuesdays. It doesn't really matter, right? The hope would be that you at least start this process and kind of take baby steps to more and more tech time out. Ideally, you would be having tech timeout time every day. And additionally, that we're not having technology be in the bedrooms to sleep. Again, inconvenient, yes, but helps you be more aware and present with where you are rather than living in the future of what if, right? What if all these things are happening on my phone? What if somebody sees that picture of me, whatever it may be? Or what if I don't get the project done? Or living in the past and reliving, like, scrolling through other kids' pictures or whatever it may be and trying to have the social media piece. So whatever works for you and your family when it comes to tech timeouts, again, ideally, and the research supports daily and not technology in the bedroom. Okay. Tip 8, hang in there. We're almost through most of these, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A as well, like I said. So tip 8 is teach and practice being socially savvy. So this one is really interesting. When we think about, I want you to put on your COVID hat for a minute. When we think about COVID and what happened to our kids' lives, I mean, of course, our own, but really our kids at any age, even the little ones, even those babies, we're seeing some impact from COVID socially, all the way up through college and beyond, right into our 20s. Those years are developmental years where you are learning and practicing kind of these social nuances. And so what's happened now is that even though it is more convenient to maybe be remote learning, for example, right? Maybe you have a 10-year-old who wants to be a remote learner, or a high schooler who doesn't like the hybrid model and wants to be full-time virtual, right? Those things, could they finish high school faster? Sure. Could they possibly learn more? Maybe they're really distracted in class. Academically, maybe. But socially, no. What we know is that when these kids, this group of kids, pre-COVID as well, but it has been much bigger since COVID, that we need to then reteach them and practice, give them opportunities to practice being socially savvy and navigating the social landscape of life. Because without that, we're seeing a huge spike in anxiety. And so that earlier, when I was looking at those graphs and I was saying like mental health disorders up, social connections down, a big piece of that is anxiety and social anxiety. Our kids, especially with the window that they missed, whatever developmental age they were at, they missed a window in that developmental process of being socially savvy and connecting. And so our job is to now teach them this. And I have talked with so many families that have like really bright kids, gifted kids that are 6 years old, 8 years old, 14 years old, whatever age. And there was an expectation that they would be just fine because academically they were just fine during COVID and hybrid learning or remote learning, whatever it may be. But now they're struggling and parents are confused. Why are you struggling now? You're back in school. We go to Gold Crown. You play basketball all the time. You've got friends. They don't feel like they have friends because they are anxious because they don't know how to practice and they didn't get the practice of being socially connected and socially savvy. So there's a part of this that then we have to say, how can we ward off loneliness? How can, we kind of address that from the fact that it is more convenient to withdraw socially. It's more convenient to just do things on your own or be virtual for school or whatever it may be. But actually, I, as your parent or your guardian or your coach or whatever it may be, need to help teach you how do we practice almost like getting through social awkward moments, right? When you walk up to a crowd in junior high, how do you do that? Do you look up? Do you say hi? Do you connect with them? Or do you look down at your phone? Do you shy away? Do you hide in the bathroom? Do you drink your water and walk by? How can you re-engage? How can you ward off that loneliness? And it's so simple when you step out of it, and it's so hard when you're going through it, because these kids and these teens and even these little kiddos, we see this with 2-year-olds who are struggling to then separate from mom or dad or whoever it may be, because they did not have the practice to learn some of this, of saying hi to another little kid, or an 18-year-old who's like, no, remote learning is just so much easier for me. It's just so much better. I learn so much more. I can get through school faster. I can go to college faster. Then they go to college and we see the same problem. Well, I'm not going to take all the classes. They offer some online ones. I'm going to start doing that. That's just better for me. It's more aligned with my major. There's all the excuses in the world. My argument to those kids and those families would be, sure, some of that is true, but we're not learning, right? You're learning a lot, sure, academically, but we're missing some of the other pieces of life. So maybe we think about how can we approach this where that kid or that teen with that really solid argument for online school, we say, okay, you can do those 3 classes virtually, and you're still going to do 1 class, 2 classes, 3 classes in person to at least have an opportunity to practice some of that kind of social nature, and so that we can ward off some of that anxiety that comes with it. Okay. Last 2 here. So tip 9 is finding shared interests. So what we know about loneliness is that one of the ways to kind of bust it and to make it go away is that if there are shared interests and shared activities, we need something, some commonality that we can hold on to with our people, right? So we talked about the 3 different groups or the 3 different people, right? The 3 different parts of our lives, but we also need something to connect us back. So it's not just, hey, how are you? Good. See you later, right? We need a way to actually feel connected to them. And that way is having something that's shared. It could be soccer, it can be arts and crafts, it can be nursing, it can be dog walking, it can be coffee, it can be lots and lots and lots of things. But it helps you have something that is shared between the 2 of you that you can pull from also for content for a conversation, which again goes back to social anxiety and those awkward moments. You have something in common, right? Not just the weather. So if you're trying to figure out, gosh, I really am, maybe you're here tonight because you're just trying to get ahead of this and you're like, yeah, I know this is a problem for people. It is not for me or my family yet. Great. What I would say is invest in these shared opportunities and shared interest. Invest in basketball, even if your kid's not super bummed about it. Invest in soccer or swim team or the play date with the neighbor or the coffee hour where the mom comes over and you have lots of kids running around. Invest in some of those moments. Are they convenient? No, it is way more convenient if your kid is not super interested to just say, all right, well, then we won't do soccer this year, or we won't go to that arts and crafts thing. Like, yeah, we can just do arts and crafts at home. Well, we did it during COVID. We have all the arts and crafts now. We have a whole room of arts and crafts. Let's just do them here. Or you could actually integrate and go to Children's Museum or all these other places and do arts and crafts. And doing that, they will meet those social connections and feel more a part of the world if they do that with other people. Okay, the last one I think is important to note. So it's knowing the warning signs. So when I think about kind of the pieces of loneliness and the convenience of loneliness, sometimes we forget that those kids that are feeling lonely may be feeling more lonely than we would like them to be feeling. Maybe even like it's been going on longer or it's more intense, like we talked about, right? So I think it's really important to know what there is there are moments of loneliness that people, all of us, probably will or have experienced, right? There are periods of that. There are things like all the things, the other 9 tips that we just talked about that you can do to support not having that feeling last too long. And then there's also a point where you say, my goodness, maybe this has been going on for a little too long, or maybe their social anxiety is really too high and now they're having panic attacks, or they won't get out of bed, or they're having, constant stomach aches, or their head hurts all the time, right? All these different things. Those things are really important to know when we're thinking about loneliness maybe being too intense or too much. And that then I would really encourage that then you're looking for some sort of support. So support can come in lots of ways. I'm a therapist, so I would say getting your kid or your family connected with a therapist would be really helpful. We do a lot of this in my practice of how to support families and individual kids and teens with getting out of feeling lonely, which is, again, like sometimes associated with depression, but can also be associated with anxiety, or just overall angst and just not feeling good. You don't have to have a diagnosis to go to therapy. You can just not be feeling your best self and just want almost more of like a tune-up. So I say we do tune-ups as well as, we're doing kind of the deep dive as well if we need that. So certainly I'm happy to be a resource to you and your family, or if there are other people in the community, you can ask your pediatricians, you can ask other people and get some resources and support. And so the image here is really just thinking about mental health illnesses and issues. These are some of the things that I would be on the lookout for. If your kid or teen or somebody is having suicidal thoughts, it's really important that you would take them, or homicidal thoughts, I should say, that you should take them to your local emergency room and get them evaluated to make sure that they stay safe and whoever else could be a safety concern also stays safe. So knowing some of those warning signs is really helpful. And with that, I'm going to wrap up here with coping skills for all, and then I'm happy to answer some questions as well. So when I'm doing talks like this, it's focused a lot on the family, it's focused a lot on kids and teens, but I don't want to neglect the adults and the parents in the room too. A lot of this applied to you today, like I said, but also just thinking about what are just coping skills? Like, how can I just keep myself mentally well? It is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? Exercise, time outside, watching funny shows, humor wards off a lot of those negative feelings, limiting news and report exposure. That's a big one. Taking time to do something that makes you feel happy daily, even if it's just reading a book or tending to your garden, or looking for 15 minutes of happiness. That really wards off a lot of negative feelings, not necessarily loneliness, but just negative feelings. So even 15-minute walk. And then decrease your pressures for productivity, including professionally. My goodness, if I had like a formula for that, I would be rich and famous, because that would be lovely. But that's the hope, is that we can start to think about this instead of the convenience of our productivity, right? That we start to think about our loneliness as just as important and impactful as our productivity. And then finally, just open for questions and comments. There's my contact information. If you would like to connect with me personally, I'm happy to do so. And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it looks like Sydney might have a question.
Yeah, I did have a question. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It was really great information. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
I'm curious how to maybe create some buy-in, because my kiddo, there's all these great activities, things like summer camp, or even the library does like teen programs. And, I teeter between like, okay, if I ask, I know I'm going to get a no. But then if I force them to go to these other activities and get out of like their shell or what they're used to doing with friends and try something new, then they might be resentful. So I'm trying to figure out how to create that buy-in to where they might want to try something new and be open to it. Or do I just be like, hey, you're doing this?
That's a great question. Some of it depends on the age. So it sounds like you have teen.
A tween, middle school. Yeah.
middle school. Okay, so you still have a little bit of sway here. Once they hit high school, you do need a little bit more buy-in. The tweens just are really, I almost say it's the itchy sweater phase, right? Everything you say, it's like, right?
Yeah.
Everything itches them. So what I would say is I would give them a choice in it. So I would frame it something like this. I'm going to pretend your kiddo's name is Bob, right? Hey, Bob. I've been thinking a lot about you. I've been thinking about your friends and summer and all the cool things that you want to do. And also that you don't really want to be signed up for everything. Totally get it. So I have come up with 3 really cool things that I think could be fun to do. If we can find a buddy for you to do them with, cool.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Or we're going to do them by ourselves and then you're going to meet some kids there. And I know that's not your first choice, but we're going to give it a shot this year. They're not going to be all summer. So they're time limited, right? Here are your 3 choices. You can do whatever it may be. Go to the library on Mondays, a whatever certain kind of club or a camp or whatever it is, right? Name 3 things. They can be all over the map in terms of time. Maybe one's once a week, maybe one's for 2 weeks, maybe one's for 1 day, whatever you think. What I would say is start small. So when you are creating buy-in, right, you want to give some choices and you're going to start small enough that maybe there will be a reluctant yes, right? Oh, fine. I'll still take it, right? I would go with it if you get a fine. Then afterwards, this is probably the most important piece is afterwards for that buy-in, when you check in with them and you say like, hey, honey, how was it? Like, Bob, how was camp today? Or like, how was the library with that group? Right. And he's like, fine. Was there anything about it that you hated? Start with the negative. They assume that you were going to start with the positive. Honey, but I'm sure it was great that you, right? You're negating their feelings because you're trying to keep it positive. And like, we do this all the time. I do this with my own kids. So I have to remind myself, nope, let them talk negative first and then talk back up. So I would say something like, was it as bad as you thought? Was it awful? Was the food terrible? Right. And they're like, it wasn't terrible. Or maybe, yeah, it was awful. What was the worst part? Were there any kids there that were just so not fun to be around? Yes, this kid would blah, blah, blah. Let him get it all out, use it as kind of a dumping hour moment, right? And then I would say, well, I'm really proud of you that you still tried it. Was there anything that you did like? Was there anything that was like semi-cool or like a maybe middle thumb? Right? And see if they can share like, yeah, I mean, I guess like so-and-so was okay. Nice. Cool, bud. Well, I'm really happy that you tried it. I'm really proud of you for giving it your all. I'm really, impressed that you were able to make it through the day. I know we still have 3 more days and I'm hoping that that middle thumb gets better, but who knows? At least you've learned that you can live through it, even if it's like a middle. Part of what we're teaching them is that they can live through hard things, even if they're socially awkward. That really helps break through that ice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much. And for the clear examples too. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Allie. That was very good information. And yeah, we'll post this on our website so we can, if you have anything you want to look back on, you can access that, and as well as sharing it with anybody you think find it useful. So
Perfect.
thanks
Thank you all
again.
so much. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.